Mhm. Good day to all, and welcome to the first International Tech Up Talk webinar series. When we are delighted to have our new partners, IFA Berlin, with us, and we will be doing these each month until the first Tech Up for Women IFA Berlin conference on the 6th of September. So welcome and enjoy the program.
Good day. My name is Cecilia Hatton from Tech Up for Women. I'd like to introduce our host today, Faye Holland. With Faye, with over 25 years international business expertise in the private sector, developing the original marketing communication strategies for the UK's first internet service provider, Faye has been described as one of the UK's prime marketing strategists and has been listed as one of the UK's most influential women in technology by Computer Weekly. So welcome, Faye.
Thanks, Cecilia. Thank you, Dawn. How exciting to be here today, kicking off the International Tech Up for Women Tech Talk. I'm here from a very sunny Cambridge in the UK, Cambridge being one of the most recognised science and technology cities. So I'm very fortunate to be working from here. I've spent my career working with many tech companies who are doing amazing world-changing things. So it's great to now be part of this community. So thank you for joining us. And a huge thank you goes to our guest speaker for today, Khadija Mustafa. So from doing my research, I've done quite a lot of work into the Tech Up for Women previous speakers. And what seems to be very consistent is that everyone is named as a force to be reckoned with, and Khadija is no different. She spent over 21 years at Microsoft, and I think it's fair to say, Khadija, that you have worked in most aspects of business, from sales to partnerships to business development, across many different sectors and across continents. You know, I think you're probably one of the most traveled people that I've ever met. Khadija is also one of the perfect examples of a woman's career that has pivoted and has adapted. And for the last 3 years, you've found yourself as a senior director, head of global partnerships for autonomous systems, AI and research division. And so you are the perfect person to be talking to us today about artificial intelligence. And the subject is the power of AI across the globe. So, first of all, we have a very broad range of attendees on the call today. We've got from tech companies to hospitality to creative to manufacturing. Let's get everyone level set. So Khadija, could you please give us a very quick overview of AI and how it's really impacting our business and everyday lives?
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for the kind introduction, Faye, and welcome to everybody. You know, it's interesting because AI is all the rage. It's a buzzword. It gets used sometimes pretty much for everything, you know, that's sort of within its vicinity. But, you know, AI is about getting machines and computers essentially to perform tasks that are normally associated with human beings. So think about all the cognitive capabilities we use, whether it's things like speech, you know, translation, comprehension. And basically, when machines start exhibiting qualities like that, or you get a machine to perform that, that's essentially AI. It's really an umbrella term. It's being used to you know, reference all of those cognitive capabilities, from things like computer vision to techniques like machine learning, etc.
That's brilliant. So we've already got this here with us. How pervasive is it? So in our normal working life, our normal daily life, how many times are we coming across AI?
So the interesting thing about AI is half the time we don't even know it's AI. We're so used to it. We've grown up with it. You know, traditionally technology came through the workforce and it impacted what we were doing in our private lives. And right now it's the reverse. So most of us are already using it, you know, whether you're going into a search engine, whether you're speaking to voice assistants, like Siri or Alexa, whether you're sitting, you're watching Netflix and it's telling you the next, 10 best movies to watch. And you're like, wow, this is exactly what I want. So these are the very obvious, simple uses of AI. So it's really all around us. But what I think sometimes we don't actually realize is AI is becoming so pervasive, and it's entering into very interesting and creative fields that many of us may not think about. So think about AI art. So you've got artificial intelligence artists, right? So pictures and art being created through that. Music can be created through AI as well. I mean, literally, it's about machines learning, right? So machines are quite intelligent that way. So from that perspective, all of a sudden, you can now make music that's similar in different classical music genres to Beatles, to you name it. It's being used in a variety of accessibility areas that we don't realize. So it's actually, fundamentally impacting the way you and I are living our lives. And for those that are especially differently abled, think about it. If you're visually impaired or you've got challenges in hearing, et cetera, you're suddenly using things like speech to text, voice recognition, et cetera, all these capabilities that are giving you capabilities that you couldn't have imagined in the past.
So how limitless is it going to be? Is there going to be a natural limit to it, or is it just going to keep growing as our imagination keeps growing?
Yes, absolutely. The sky's the limit, right? The train has left the station. There's a lot of people are spending a lot of time watching YouTube with some of the fear associated with AI. It's going to overtake everything. Robots are going to control us. Elon Musk from Tesla, a lot of well-known people, credible folks have a perspective that we will get to a point. I mean, there's this concept known as singularity and artificial general intelligence, which is basically the point at which machines overtake humans or become smarter than us, right? We've seen it in the movies. A lot of us have grown up with it. Sci-fi suddenly becomes reality. And the point is that, yes, we're heading in that direction. My own humble opinion is we're still a bit away from that. So I think there's tremendous opportunity, and I see that with a lot of positivity. But yes, the sky is the limit. It's limited by our imaginations. If you look around us, the way it's being leveraged and the way people are coming up with ideas, it's fascinating because it actually impacts more of us than people think, right? Because you often think, oh, AI is the domain of people in AI. And it's like, no, it's you and I.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely everywhere. It's the old story of the washing machine coming in or the car coming in and it displaced the mangle or the horse and cart, but actually it didn't. It just changes things. Things move on. There is quite a big discussion though in terms of how it changes people's jobs, and I want to come on to that a little bit in the future. But we've seen people's roles change because the blue collar workers generally have been affected, but now it's even moving into white collar workers with marketing and legal services and things like that. So you talked about the movies and science fiction. Do you have any specific concerns around that, or is it just part of we have to make sure that we create what we need as human beings?
Yeah, so you touched on two things, right? One is sort of the concern about how it's redefining jobs, and absolutely. But the reality is it's not new, and I don't just mean AI is not new. I mean, as we're transforming as a society, if you think about the industrial revolution, you think about the steam engine, you think about electricity, you think about manufacturing. I mean, you just think about so many things that have come up. They've all disrupted traditional industries. So I think the nature of life is to evolve. And what happens is you do end up displacing certain categories of work, but more often than not, you end up actually creating a whole slew of opportunities. So today, I think the jobs or opportunities we see, most of us don't even know that they exist. Right? This isn't about a question around where do you want to be 10 years from now, because chances are you're probably going to be doing something 10 years from now that doesn't exist today. So it's about transformation of jobs. It's about new jobs and opportunities coming up. And yes, there's going to be a lot of stuff that is going to get automated. There's going to be certain type of roles that people who are in them, they should start thinking about how they reskill and retool. But I don't think that's a bad thing, right? It's just knowing that there's an opportunity. And in fact, the way I see it is our lives have become, no pun intended, so robotic with so much mundane stuff that we have to do, that AI is very good at taking over the mundane, repetitive tasks. So that has been sort of the first foray of not just AI, but I would say sort of baseline automation technologies in general, right? So those are the first areas they've targeted. So I actually look forward to the day when I can actually spend time using my brain in higher order business or more creative work, which still right now is not the domain of computers alone.
Yeah, it's that staring out of the window and now having that thought that we don't get time to because we're so focused on churning through the next task. Okay, so let's come on to the jobs and the roles a little bit more in a short while. So just a fact for you here, which I'm sure you know, but for everyone else on the call, you've talked about machines and computers performing these tasks and automating the tasks. There's 40 trillion gigabits of data in the world. And the bit that I really like about this fact is that's around 57 times the number of grains of sand on all the beaches in the world. I mean, that is just like phenomenal. So actually, with all of that data, and that's going to double every couple of years and continue to double, we have to have something as clever as AI to actually be able to use that data. Otherwise it's just pointless data. So as a employee or as a business leader, what do we need to know? How do we engage with AI? How should we be using it in our businesses, in our workplaces?
So, it's interesting. The comment you just made, right? So there's a tagline that I love. People have said it a lot, which is in AI, data is the new oil, right? So it's changing the nature, not only in terms of business, but in terms of politics, in terms of so many different things. And there's a huge desire, to your point, because companies, and by the way, just the data that you're talking about, majority of that has actually been created in the last 3 to 6 years. So with the rise of social media and so when you actually think about how exponential it's been, I mean, the curve has been like this actually. So it's very, and a lot of that is coming even out of the domain of businesses, right? So it's not just you're working for company X and you've created your own amount of data, but the fact that all of this is around us in the consumer side. So what businesses, I feel it's really important is businesses are getting on that bandwagon. Like if you ask CEOs and CIOs, AI is definitely within the top initiatives. And that's great. And you'll ask CIOs, and many of them, like over 80%, there's all kinds of surveys, et cetera, out there, but over 80% will say this is a top priority. But if you actually look in the business domain of how many companies are implementing AI solutions across the companies, or more than just point solutions, it's something like 10, 15, at best, maybe 20%, because it all depends on how you define it. So the utilization of it is incredibly skim, right? So I think we need to sort of, businesses have a huge opportunity because that's going to be their competitive edge. But the point is we've only scratched the surface. Now, what I tell business leaders to really think about is so I don't think AI is something that should be delegated. So if you're a CEO of a company or you're a divisional leader, I mean, there have been many different initiatives that you can sort of delegate, pass on, and sort of just keep a tab on. But this is something that is going to become so important that it's going to define competitive edge for that particular company, as well as in some cases survival, right? I would go that extreme to say that, because if some companies aren't able to compete, they sort of won't be there tomorrow. So it's something that I feel like the senior ranks need to familiarize themselves with. And oftentimes I find that as much as AI is a buzz, people really don't know, so what does that mean? So it doesn't mean you have to become an AI expert. It means educate yourself enough so that you can understand the organizational implications. You can hire the right people to lead those initiatives. If someone's telling you data is the new oil, well, how are you going to set up your data estate? One of the big issue I find with companies today is that they're implementing point AI solutions, because data is everywhere. They've got no control over it. They've got no way of cleansing it. They actually don't even have an organizational structure that supports how it can actually be leveraged. So these are some very specific points, but going beyond that, I think similar to data being the new oil, the war for talent for companies is huge. There is such a shortage. I know we'll talk about it when we talk more about roles, but if you're a business leader, an executive, you really have to think about how you're going to reskill and retool and support that with your employees. It isn't about, oh, jobs are going to go away. I can cut out X number in my call center through, smart virtual agents, for example. It's how am I going to repurpose that skill set for the next competitive piece I want to put them in, right? So it's a huge thing that I think companies are talking about. Some are doing a really good job with, but it's still an open field, right? And the beauty of this is reskilling and retooling in the past required years and years. We're in such a fast-paced environment that honestly, if you're going to go to a four-year college or you're going to send your employees to a degree, by the time to get a degree in AI, for example, assuming that even exists, right? Because that varies. By the time they come back, their information will be stale. So this concept of reskilling and retooling, in this environment is very different from the past.
Yeah, and that could take us down a whole different conversation about how AI is turning education, skills development, everything on its head. So, but we'll probably not go there right now, I think, in the interest of time. I think your point there about competitive edge is really important. It is most definitely the CEO's job to make sure that they are leading that, but it's also the people within the organization. And there have been a couple of questions coming up already around how do we use AI internally, and I think that that's the key point. It's internal and external. So it's like you've said, it's about the war for talent, retaining your talent, making sure you're looking after them, and it's the external in terms of really understanding who your customer is, because we are inundated as customers, as end users, with information. So the more switched on the organization is using AI, the more competitive they're going to be.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit now around your passion. So obviously your passion for the job, for this whole industry, but actually some of your other areas that you're very passionate around are about inclusivity, about women in tech, and I think that the power of AI can actually bring all of that together. So what do you think we should be talking to everyone on this session today about in terms of their career and future roles? And do you have to be a techie to be in AI, or are there other roles that are there?
Yeah, I'm definitely very passionate about this piece because one can go down the detail of how can we use AI, and so much is being said and written and talked about on that subject. It's at its very core fundamental, AI is going to impact everything from the jobs you and I are going to get to whether we can we or our loved ones would have the likelihood to end up in jail, to whether you're going to be labeled a terrorist or not, to whether you're going to get a mortgage, right? Being able to finance a home. So in other words, am I going to be able to have a roof over my head or not? To being able to have, there will be medical advancements in this space around risk conditions if you're a pregnant mother, and what are the chances of there being trauma to the baby, et cetera, right? So it is so pervasive, and yet this is an area that's being defined by a minority, because technology itself is not a bad thing. It's the way technology is used. So when we talk about AI needs diverse voices, I'm talking about diversity in gender, diversity in color, diversity in capabilities, because I mentioned earlier about the differently abled. It's such a space. Had folks who weren't differently abled not been able to leverage technology, for those that don't have those issues would never have even thought about it. So the reason the possibilities are endless is because you've got all these different minds working together to empower it. And unfortunately, we know that this is an issue in STEM, right? So science, technology, engineering, mathematics field in general, there are very few diverse voices compared to the population. I mean, we talked about gender. I mean, women are more than 50% of the population, yet even in tech companies, they're whatever at the 20x% of the workforce, right? And in AI, it starts getting smaller. In AI research, 10 to 15%, if you go to these major AI conferences. So we definitely have to tackle that, because at its core fundamental, what happens is you get these breakthrough algorithms, right? That then are used to basically, data is fed to them. So all this data that you talked about. Now, if these algorithms have been made coming from a less diverse perspective or not enough voice represented, basically what you put in is what you get out, right? So I think what's critical is we have to recognize that it's not just about us saying to other people, oh, yeah, we need to get more diversity. It's what role are we going to play in getting there? So when it comes to those traditional skill sets that still have an opportunity. So for those listening who come from the field, you've got a computer science background, mathematics, you're an algorithm expert, you're a data scientist, into data analytics, some of the periphery areas, but you could basically move easily into AI. I encourage a lot more people to get into this space, because I think it's going to impact society. The second thing is what you touched on, or what you asked me, which is very critical, is AI is not a domain only for those that have this expertise. If we're talking about things like ethics of AI, or if someone's questioning whether an algorithm that's being fed certain data from like COVID, right? I mean, certain data around COVID is coming in, and suddenly someone looks at the outputs and says, but wait a minute, that parameter that you just fed in, or that data that you're feeding this algorithm, that data, the reason that data is there is because of X, Y, and Z. It's actually not accurate, right? You need people who've got those insights. So whether you're coming from a medical profession and have that expertise. So this is a field that can use ethicists, it can use clinicians, it can use teachers, right? AI is about natural language processing. So think about it if you're a linguist. Think about lawyers. There's always jobs for lawyers in every field, right? Think about policymakers, because now you've got this technology running in the wild, right? So whether you're sitting in Germany, Japan, UK, Israel, you name it, it's not just the implications of using technology within your organization, within your community and country, but also with the world, because AI knows no borders. You cannot put up a fence with AI. So the reality is there's an opportunity for so many of us coming from so many different backgrounds to play in. You just have to think about what your strength is and then figure out how you can get into this field. And then the reality is there's a shortage of talent. Yes, there's a shortage of very specific type of talent, but as this area starts becoming more common, so that the 80% of CIOs talking about even implementing it in companies, which right now are in 10, 15%. Imagine now companies start taking that on, they're going to need expertise. I know even in big tech where I come from, we've hired all kinds of people. So I think the opportunity that way is endless. And I would love to encourage people to see themselves in this field.
Yeah, and I think, Khadija, what you've just shown there is, it almost loops back to the first question, which is how pervasive is it? It is hugely pervasive. I would argue that not a single person listening to this session will not be affected, and their roles will not be affected by AI, because it just will. So if you think about that, how on earth do people stay up to date with it? Things are going to change so fast. How do people, where do people go to stay up to date? How do they keep that professional development going?
Yeah. If you asked me this question 5 or 10 years ago, I would have said, oh, it's going to be expensive. It's going to be time consuming. And there will be limited areas you could, like limited schools, you were tied to geography. Post-pandemic world, I think the playing field has just become leveled. So number one, everything's happening remote, right? So people are able to access, courses, classes, all of these opportunities that were available in person, where before, oh, I can't get a visa to X. Am I going to spend $100,000 a year doing Y? As we know, a lot of the big universities, right? I mean, the academic profession or educational institutions are going to struggle staying relevant from that perspective. So they're making things available online. So for anybody who wants to, I mean, the top universities have courses, and they're, by the way, doing shorter courses because they know they want to make it available to more people. And by virtue of this field, you're not going to have a multi-year degree in it. And let me clarify, I'm not saying you can't become a PhD in mathematics and you're doing AI research and science. Absolutely. What I'm saying is for those of you that are thinking of retooling and you're sitting in a profession, you're sort of saying, yeah, I'm already a lawyer, I'm a mid-career professional. I want to get more into sort of, there's going to be a lot of legal implications of this thing, but I don't understand what this thing is. You can take short certificate courses, right? You could take them for free. You could take them for a fee. You can take them for 4 weeks. You could take them for 4 days. You could take them for 4 months. So the reality is there's tons of it out there. I mean, even Microsoft, we're a tech company. We're not an educational institution, but we've got an AI business school that you could go to that we've particularly set up for, business executives to think about it and get core knowledge. And we've partnered with academia in that. You've got, the other tech companies I'm sure are doing that too. You've got, like I said, the big brand name universities offering courses. You guys can do the research on, I mean, you know which ones those are, right? I don't want to be biased and calling out names. There's tons of, programs out there from very well-known people in the field. There's Coursera, et cetera. So I think it's not a question of how do you do it. It's a question of if you flip the switch in your mind and you say, this is really interesting, I want to explore this. There's so much out there. And the spectrum varies. Do you want to be more technical? Do you want to learn about machine learning techniques and start getting into those specifics and go the technical path? Or do you want to repurpose a skill set that's sort of ancillary, but you're like, wow, I'm within the medical profession, and I know the more I can learn about AI, the more I can help with outcomes, right? So it just depends, because this field or the field of AI needs domain experts. In fact, much like technology, it's all moving in the low code, no code direction. So there's definitely a lot of specialty and skills needed, but the idea is how do we get more people to use AI easily, right? So think about the days of HTML websites. Beforehand, you had to learn HTML and then you hired someone to make your website. Today, you've got drag and drop. Anybody can do it. Anybody literally can spend an hour or two, just, train themselves a little bit and basically create something as simple as that. But I remember 20 years ago, that was not easy. So now what's going to happen is the whole detail of which algorithm and do I have to actually write it out and, what's the technology under the hood becomes a black box. But if you are a plant floor technician, or you're a doctor, or, you're a space researcher, now you're going to start being able to leverage these AI building blocks without necessarily having to become the detailed technologist behind it.
Yeah. Okay, that's brilliant. So I'm going to give you a crystal ball question now. Well, I'm sold. I want to change my career a little bit. I want to learn. I want to develop. Where should I go? Where's the new growth area for AI? Where's the where should I be pointing myself at for a role using these newfound skills?
Okay, I would say, where don't you point yourself? Because I think it's really important to ask, so the person asking themselves that question, I mean, look, the US alone, and then of course we've got an international audience, we have a global shortage of data scientists. Because right now, the tools still, for example, data wrangling is a big thing. So when you think about mainstream AI using the mainstream techniques, it's all about getting your data state in order so that you can actually feed that to your algorithms and get interesting outputs, right? And data right now is sitting in all kinds of format. So in general, what you're finding is companies have such a huge need. So, whether it's known as a data scientist role, for example, but, these are going to be data engineers, they're going to be data detectives, there's going to be, call it whatever you like, but you'll start seeing some very creative names for roles like this. So here and now, there's a shortage. These are well-paying jobs, right? There are courses out there that you can take to start getting into this field. In fact, companies are recognizing that experience is almost counting more than education, because there aren't so many experienced folks out there. I know as I build an ecosystem for the technologies we go after, we look at that, because actually dealing with real world challenges and applying AI in that, especially in the enterprise space, is a skill set that's not incredibly common. So if you're someone coming from that kind of a background, that's a slam dunk, right? But as we talked about, there's all these folks coming from the side professions. And I think the advancement of or the use of AI in medical advancements are going to be very interesting. I mean, I would say in all fields it's interesting, but medical is something we can all relate to, because when you've got a sick member of a family and they have no hope, and all of a sudden, and time is of essence, right? Things like AI are going to completely shift that. So if you're coming from that domain, just learn about it, because you don't have to be the person who's actually going to go select the package of AI, or the one who's going to build the algorithm, or the one who's going to necessarily apply it, but your expertise might be needed in the periphery. So that example that I was talking about, because I was speaking to one of our researchers who's actually working with hospitals in COVID on AI research, and he was talking about and actually he's dealing with hospitals in general. So he was telling me something very interesting, that oftentimes when you find out women who are pregnant, what the big risk factors for trauma to the baby are, the factors that are being considered, usually the doctors will look at, are actually not what they found in one of the cases. They actually said it had to do with the size of the baby and the size of the mother as causing extra pressure. Now, usually if you're a mother going to the doctors, people aren't measuring the distance between, your sort of pelvic area, for example. But in the algorithms that they had created, they said that if you could look at these two factors and actually feed the algorithm that information, you could narrow in on the issue immediately and actually get that addressed. Now, it's not the person who's actually writing the algorithm who knows that, right? I mean, they'll find interesting inputs coming out of the data, but suddenly when you're talking to the doctors and the nurses, you get all these different insights coming in. I'm specifically focused personally, for example, about using AI for industrial automation, right? So manufacturing, consumer packaged goods, kind of things that have a physical manifestation. We're using AI to make the perfect Cheeto, right? So the snack food that Pepsi provides. There's actually a case study on it. Now, who would have thought that, number one, you actually need AI to make the perfect Cheeto, and how complex that process is. And now we're talking about using AI in the context of people who have manufacturing expertise, right? Running equipment, people who have expertise in snack food. So if you're someone who's sitting there saying, yeah, I'm working for a CPG company and okay, me and AI. So there's so many different connection points. And I think the more people start learning about it, the more they will decide sort of, where do I want to be on this spectrum, right? And then therefore, how much education do I need, and where do I need to get more depth?
Brilliant. Okay, so that's gone so fast, but I want to make sure we try and get some of these questions in from people that are part of the call. And if you're listening to this on record, then please do just send them in over email, and I'm sure we can respond to them. So I'm just randomly going to pick. Don't worry if we don't go through all of the questions. We can follow up on them. So we've got Alexandra here. What are the steps a leader should take to assess where there are AI possibilities for a business?
Well, so I think, targeting the most high value areas is very important. I think a lot of reasons why AI initiatives sometimes fail is if you're going to go just for the low hanging fruit and you can't actually show high ROI, there's less commitment at the top to budget it, put resources on it. So I would say try to find a beachhead win that's going to have so much value that you can then take that success and apply it more broadly.
Okay, there's a couple from Alicia, but I think we've covered those in terms of how do you utilize AI in your own business positions. Are there ways to assess our roles, departments, use of AI? Is there anything you want to add onto what you've already said?
From the perspective of
it within your own individual working positions?
Yeah, so in our case, so I'm in a part of Microsoft where we're basically taking our cutting edge AI to market. So it's unique in the sense that not only are we taking some very advanced forms of AI and applying them in different enterprise situations where oftentimes the companies that we talk to haven't thought about it, but we've actually combined it with some new techniques around machine teaching, et cetera. So we're actually creating a market while we're trying to show value to different organizations. So for example, this Cheetos example I gave, because it's a public case study and I can reference it. Oftentimes what we find is when you do go to the market, people are used to good enough, right? That works, that's good enough. And when companies actually want to adopt something is when they can see that it's going to take them, it's either going to save a lot of money, right? Create a lot of profits, maybe retool their workforce in a way they haven't thought. But that's when people start making a change and recognizing what it can do. So we spend a lot of, like I'm in that space. And of course, I'm building a whole ecosystem of partners that work together with us to deliver on that.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've got a couple of questions here, as you would expect, around privacy. So Patrick's asked, in your opinion, do you think societies are limiting their abilities to advance their AI due to privacy, security, or government regulations? And then before you answer that one, let me just throw the next one in from Paula, which is Apple recently shared a change to their iOS system to improve customers' privacy. How will that impact AI?
Yeah, they're different angles, and it's I have concerns both ways. So yes, you're right. If we let AI run wild, it could probably do more, but it could do more in ways that maybe you and I don't want, right? So when I talked about, I'm going to digress. I'm going to just elaborate on one point for a minute. When we talk about the implications of not having enough diverse voices, right? It also means things like policy. Because all of a sudden, if an AI algorithm is going to decide which people are going to go to jail and how long they're going to stay there, at that point, you would be concerned about privacy and you would wonder, wait a minute, where did they get this information and how is it being used? So on the one hand, it's going to slow things down. My bigger concern right now is I actually don't think public policy and even privacy has caught up with how AI is being used, because we live in a world today where most of us volunteer information, right, through social media without even thinking about its implications. And tomorrow, do I want someone preventing me from entering a country because all of a sudden they found out whether I was vaccinated or not, because I posted something on Facebook, not realizing that all of a sudden, God forbid, a family member is having a surgery somewhere and I'm caught up in this immigration scenario where I can get into country X to see a family member. So my concerns are that public policy, government, and society needs to catch up with how fast AI is moving, because my concern is decisions will be made that you and I may not be happy with. And at the end of the day, look, we all live in a world where that happens, but I think we would all agree that there's a role for us to play. We want to know that the dialogue happened. We want to know that there was an opportunity for us to be part of that decision-making. And right now, my concern is from a societal and citizen perspective, we're not playing a leading enough role that I think everyone who's on this call or listening in, including myself, should be doing.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to do two really fast questions now. You've already covered resources, but Min has posted something here that actually links onto what you've just been saying. Min's an attorney for 20 years, very interested in the ethics of AI. I mean, we all should be interested in the ethics of AI. How do we keep ourselves better informed?
Yeah, so there's a whole body of work around the ethics of AI. Look up that responsible AI, transparency, discoverability, etc. And that's actually another field that I think is going to need people from all walks of life, because it has everything to do with not only the companies creating the technology being leveraged by others, but those that are consuming it, businesses as well as individuals, as well as how that stuff gets used, right? And think about it, like, I mean, many of us, or since you brought up the subject about ethics, I'm sure most of you have heard about, call it the scandals or the negative press around facial recognition software not kind of causing issues, right? Either it's recognizing darker skinned people in a certain light more, or even gender issues. So the reality is when issues like that happen, we need to decide where those errors are coming from. And think about it. I was talking to our researcher. You can have algorithms as well that can be editable, but who's editing it and how are they editing it? And am I okay with that? So even when there is discoverability and transparency, and you know, wait a minute, we have a piece of technology that's biased, what happens next? Also, the ethical questions of, as a big tech company, we're coming up with technology, it gets used downstream a certain way, but we didn't know it. What are the ethics there? If you're a consuming company and you're leading a tender, selecting AI technology, you've got different companies. Do you get to, before you purchase the technology, should you be asking what's the makeup of the team that built this technology? Do you have diverse voices? Because we want to make sure that this technology, is robust enough for us. I mean, lots of very interesting questions that still need to be addressed that are in the process. Lots of stuff out there. Do read it. Microsoft has an Office of Responsible AI as well. We put a lot of information out there, and I definitely encourage everyone to read more about it.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And that did actually go on to Sheila's last question, which was around algorithms and how do you know what you're asking and how it's going to be used. So I think you by default kind of covered that one as well. We are at the end of our time for today. So Khadija, thank you. I'm sure that we could all carry on asking you questions and interacting with you for much longer than our given time today. Do you have any final takeaway comments or thoughts you would like to share?
Just two things. One is there's definitely an opportunity for people from all walks of life to start, either getting into the realm of AI or influencing it. But the piece I would leave you all with is really the societal implications. What do I, as a citizen, how do I want to think about AI? Because even if you're a stay-at-home mom and you've chosen that as a vocation, you're like, well, I'm not entering the workforce. I don't have to think about jobs. Know that it's going to impact the future of your children. And the same questions that are asked, right? How are you going to lobby your government officials about what kind of privacy rules are we putting in? How do we think about AI in government programs? Something a little less in the US, more so overseas, where you've got bigger sort of impact to things like education and healthcare, and that's nationalized, et cetera. So I say that our role as citizens is so important in this space. So please educate yourself and play an active role.
Brilliant. Khadija, thank you very much for your time today. It's been very insightful. Thank you to everyone for listening in. As we said at the start of the call, this is the first of the International Tech Up Talks webinar series. They're going to run from April through to September, so please do sign up for them. Also, make sure that you put the International Tech Up for Women conference in your diary. It's going to be on the 6th of September and it's being run in conjunction with the partners over at IFA Berlin. And if you're stuck and you want some more inspiration, then do go and look at techupforwomen.com as well. That's it. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Faye, and everyone.